Thanks for being with us, Dr. Jacobs. Now, these latest reports that we're getting of potential damage to the fuel rods, what does that actually mean and how serious is that?
That's very serious. The fuel rods are where the fuel, the nuclear fuel for nuclear power plants are stored. And so as a result, the fuel rods are what contains most of the radioactive material. So damage to the fuel rods primarily means the melting of the fuel rods, and the melting of the fuel rods is what releases higher levels of radiation. So any damage to the fuel rods is what we're trying to avoid in all cases. So any damage to it does increase significantly the amount of radiation that will enter the environment.
And also, worryingly, there are reports of radiation levels rising in another province in Japan. How can you comment on that? Is it coming from the reactor there or spreading from Fukushima?
There's the claims of the Japanese government at this point is that the radiation at the Onagawa reactor are not coming from the reactors at that site, but are actually from Fukushima number 1, from the explosion at Fukushima number 1. So this is worrying as well, because if this is true, this would indicate that the radiation from Fukushima has reached quite a distance from the plant itself. The claims are that the radiation levels were high briefly and then went down, and this would correspond to the timing of the explosion in Fukushima. But as I say, seeing as how the evacuation area has been 10, 15, 20 kilometers away, if in the next prefecture, if measurable radiation was present, then obviously radiation is spreading beyond the evacuated area.
What sort of distance are we talking here? How far has it travelled?
I'm not sure the exact distance. I believe it's somewhere around 100 kilometers, but it could be a little bit less than that. But it is on the other side of the bay from Sendai. It's north of Sendai, whereas the Fukushima site is south of Sendai. So that would be quite a distance. That would certainly indicate that if it did travel that far, that there was bound to have been measurable radiation in Sendai city itself.
And you're right, significantly further than that exclusion zone. And of course, throughout all of this, we're constantly seeing conflicting reports coming out of Japan. Is the Japanese government telling us all the truth here, do you think?
I think that there's very conflicting reports coming out. On the one hand, you have the Japanese government claiming that there was some melting of the fuel in the number 3 reactor at Fukushima number 1 site, and then you also have reports that they were in error when they said that any of the fuel had melted. There's two possibilities. Obviously, one is that dire information is being withheld in an effort to make the situation seem better than it is and also to avoid panic. But the other, perhaps more likely scenario is that the government is not quite certain of the state of affairs in the reactors. And so you're finding conflicting reports coming out from different spokespeople. But either scenario certainly suggests that the situation is far from under control.
And of course, we keep hearing this rather frightening expression, the risk of a partial meltdown at the plant. How possible is the risk of a new explosion out there in Fukushima?
Well, according to reports this afternoon and evening here in Japan, there's a significant possibility of an explosion at the number 3 unit at Fukushima number 1. There was pumping of water in order to cool the reactor vessel and cool the rods down. But apparently when the water that was being pumped in was switched to seawater, it resulted in some bad effects, and hydrogen has gathered like it did in the first Fukushima reactor at Fukushima number 1 before that explosion. So there's attempts to be venting it, but there certainly appears to be, according to reports, another buildup of hydrogen, which, since that was what caused, according to reports, the explosion at the first reactor, there's certainly a potential that this could lead to an explosion at this reactor if it's not alleviated well.
And also just looking further ahead, we've been told that the winds are blowing towards the Pacific Ocean, and as a result there's no danger of any possible contamination reaching China or Russia, etc. But of course it doesn't take much to change the direction of the wind, does it?
It doesn't take much at all. And there's a couple of things I would say about that. And one is that if our best case scenarios are down to hoping that the wind blows in the right direction, that doesn't indicate that things are in very good shape. I would also indicate that I would also mention that if the wind is blowing out to the Pacific, which is the best case scenario, that would move any radiation that does leak, be it small amounts or larger amounts, out to the Pacific Ocean. But that radiation does not just go away if it blows out to the Pacific Ocean. That radiation is still radioactive material that could easily blow in the upper atmosphere across the Pacific Ocean. And if the wind is blowing that way, it may alleviate any problem in eastern Russia, and it may alleviate any problem in the Korean Peninsula, but it could well bring some amount of radioactive fallout down on the North American continent and on the west coast of the United States. So once that radiation is released into the atmosphere, that's the problem. It's good for some people if it blows one way, and good for some people if it blows another way. But those are, but that's not a good situation if what we're counting on is who gets exposed and which way the radiation blows.
No, it's not indeed. OK, Dr. Robert Jacobs, a Research Associate Professor of Nuclear History and Culture at Hiroshima Peace Institute. Many thanks for speaking to us.